got 1 minute, and we'll be getting started. I'm going to do a brief introduction. I'm going to talk about the purpose of the committee because we're new. Perfect. And actually, I'm going to talk about the purpose first and then introduce. Great. I think that's great. Steve will take over from here, and you certainly want to field questions. You've got an area where you can type those in. I'll tell them about that.
You might want to give them Amanda's email, awilson@cabr.org, if you don't know off the top of your head.
Yeah.
So they have an alternate if they want to do that. And again, the last slide does have her email for follow-ups so they can get to us.
Okay, it's high noon, and we are going to get started with our today's presentation. Today's presentation is brought to you in part fully by the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors and the Realtor Affiliate Committee, a new inaugural year for this committee. And I'll share with you briefly our purpose. The purpose of this new committee is to promote business growth for all CABR members through a collaboration of knowledge, experience, and information. The focus of all our efforts is to ensure that the Realtor and affiliate members find the content we provide to have a high level of information that will ultimately lead to the enhancement of their business and improved member relations. Today, we're going to be talking about recent changes in the appraisal process. And I am Kris Cooper, the chair of this year's Realtor Affiliate Committee, and with me is Steve Pavin, licensed appraiser and member of our committee, and also Phil Forbes, a loan officer specialist here in Cincinnati, also a member of our committee. You'll have a PowerPoint presentation that we'll follow along with, and you can ask questions in your field. There is an area for you to type questions. We will be taking care of those and fielding them towards the end, so be sure to share questions because there is a lot of information about the changes in the appraisal process that you may have. So without delaying any more introductions, Steve, please.
Thank you, Kris, and welcome everybody to today's webinar, the first 2015 webinar of the webinar committee, but not the last. There'll be some great information coming to you as the year goes forward, so keep your eyes peeled. I'm excited to talk to you today about what we labeled recent changes in the appraisal process, but the focus is on a new review system that is called Collateral Underwriter. It's a Fannie Mae program. And the question on the mind of the real estate community is, will this affect real estate transactions? So we're going to take a look a little bit today at what Collateral Underwriter consists of, how it works, a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what it can do for the lenders, and where it's going to take us in terms of the impact it could have on real estate transactions. We covered this, but I did want to toss out, we are in the office of the Amanda Wilson, the Education Director for CABR, and another way you can ask questions is via her email. That's awilson@cabr.org. So you're welcome to pop it on your screen. We're monitoring that, and Amanda is monitoring her email. So what is Collateral Underwriter? It is simply an automated appraisal review system. It's a review application developed by Fannie Mae that performs an automated analysis of appraisals submitted to the Uniform Collateral Data Portal. Easy for me to say, right? That's a tongue twister. But what that is an electronic medium that allows the GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and other users of appraisals to have the computer read and analyze the documents that we submit. In a very simplified explanation of Collateral Underwriter, its purpose is to identify risk and try to move that kind of to the beginning of the process rather than something that might be discovered later, and that will be more meaningful to you as we go through the presentation. The immediate function of Collateral Underwriter is to assign what is called a risk rating to the collateral based on the automated review. A lot of Fannie Mae's training focuses on a differential between an appraisal or an appraiser, that's a problem, an appraisal, that's a problem, and identifying collateral that may have issues that make it a little bit more risky in terms of serving as collateral for that lender. The risk system is numerical. 1 is the lowest number in the system and the lowest level of risk. 5 is the highest number in the system and the highest level of risk. And we'll explain as we go through today a little bit about what it might recognize to make it go which direction on that scale. It's important to note that while Fannie Mae's use of collateral underwriter is at a different stage, it is not a new development for there to be electronic review completed of appraisal reports. In fact, probably for at least a decade, there have been computers reading the appraisals that we submit to the lending process. So it's not a new concept, but it is a new technology, quite advanced compared to anything that has happened in the past. And a side note that we may revisit with as we cover more slides, it is for use by Fannie Mae lenders only at this point, but it has partners that are in other aspects of the lending industry where other either individual banks or other arms of the lending community have already created similar products. And if this works as Fannie Mae suggests, I would anticipate within a year or two, nearly all appraisals are going to be submitted through a similar function.
How is Fannie Mae suggesting this would work, Steve?
That is going to come up as we go through a couple of slides, but their core point, Kris, is to move the analysis of the collateral to the beginning of the process. So this will be a lender opportunity to make a better judgment on whether this collateral might have an elevated level of risk. And this is going to, I think, come up on the next slide. One of the real serious things that we've dealt with over recent years in the real estate community, and especially Phil to my left in the lending community, is the repurchase demands or the buyback evolution that we've gone through. We termed it the buyback phenomenon last year for some educational things we were working on, and that has been probably the biggest economic loss to the lending community, and I'm at 39 years hanging around in this industry, I would suspect. And Phil, would you agree that's probably the biggest source of economic loss during our careers?
Absolutely. We in the lending community look at that as really about the greatest risk we face. So virtually 90%, 98% of the due diligence we're doing up front is specifically targeted at preventing buybacks. Exactly what we don't want.
So what this does is moves a Fannie Mae review system that has been behind the scenes that they've been using for 2 or 3 years to the lender level. And I think everybody listening, and certainly every appraiser that I've interacted with, that concept is great. There are other things and there are industry concerns that we're going to cover as we go through this, but if we look at it from that simple standpoint, trying to identify a riskier file to a lender to help them remain profitable and recognize an on-piece of collateral or something that was harder to value that might be riskier if they have to take it back is an important part of this process.
This risk you mentioned, it's only pertaining to the house or the property. Am I right in saying that?
That's the premise, Kris, is that if a property is an odd property, going to the third bullet point on the screen, it kind of speaks to this. The risk flags are used to identify appraisals with a heightened risk of quality issues, overvaluation, and property eligibility or policy compliance. So let's.
When you say quality issues, are you referring to the condition of the house?
We're referring to the quality of the collateral to serve its purpose. In other words, is this a piece of collateral that's kind of plain vanilla, simple, not the property itself is not risky? Or is it a property where the appraiser really had no comparables similar to that piece of collateral, to where there were some unusual things necessary? I can render an opinion of value on any residential piece of real estate you send my way, but I can't always make it comply with the rules, regulations, and wishes of those who use my appraisal reports. So the quality they're referring to is the quality of the collateral, not necessarily is it a lower quality house versus a higher quality house.
We brought up the term buybacks, and it occurred to me that we may want to flesh that out a little bit for those who may not understand. Most lenders, one way or another, are selling a mortgage loan after it's done. So whether you're a bank or a broker or what have you, ultimately what usually happens with the loan at some point is that it is purchased by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, regardless of who collects the payment on it. And that gives the lender the ability, by selling that loan off, to go make another loan. And what happens in the case of a buyback that we're referring to here is that Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac looks over an individual loan file sometimes, and it can be horrible if it's the case of a pool of loan files, looks it all over and says, well, this doesn't meet our guidelines. And appraisals have a series of guidelines. There's, of course, different guidelines we adhere to with regard to income and assets and a lot of other things that we do. But appraisals are obviously one of them. So if a file has an appraisal in it that doesn't meet the guideline, and let's say it was a $200,000 loan that we made, normally as a lender, what happens with that $200,000 loan is we lend the customer the $200,000 to buy the house, and then we sell that loan to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac for $202,000 or $204,000. And that difference of $2,000 or $4,000 that we sold the loan to is what we call profit, and how we fund and pay our salaries and pay our rent and all the other things that we do. But in the case of a buyback, what happens is Fannie Mae comes back and says, well, this loan doesn't fit the guidelines specified. We'd like our $204,000 back. And when this customer makes payments, then you're welcome to collect the payments. But in the meantime, we'd like our $200,000 back.
So Phil, let me understand. They're buying these loans from you before they review the qualifications?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay.
Because the loan's purchased, and there's some sort of initial review done, but very often, and especially in today's day and age, the loan is reviewed after it's purchased, and then maybe it's not re-reviewed until 4 years later when the borrower doesn't make the payment. And it's at that point that the borrower, maybe they lost their job, right? And all of a sudden, Fannie Mae's staring at a foreclosure on this file, and they look at it and go, oh, wait a second. The comps used in the appraisal weren't acceptable. And as a result of that, we're going to ask you to buy the loan back.
Well, these things, from my perspective in the real estate world, from a realtor's perspective, those things mean nothing to me.
I understand that,
Okay.
but I'm just trying to flesh out this concept of what is a buyback, because we're using this term a lot. And, the lenders clearly don't like a buyback, and I just want people to understand this is what a buyback is. And hopefully I'm communicating that, it's a real risk for us, not only in the weeks or months that follow the closing of a loan, but we can get, I have heard in the world of lenders recently settling on packages of loans from 2006, 8 years old. And all of a sudden, a settlement was finally made on loans done 8 years ago.
Now, let me put this right into your bailiwick, Kris, because we're going to make this make sense to you. If the property is unusual, it may be harder to value, may be a higher risk file, but you can still sell that property. But the difference here is that it may affect that property's ability to serve as collateral. Let's look at one thing on bullet point 3 on the slide that we're on right now. Notice one long word in that paragraph. It's going to identify, quote, overvaluation. Now also notice that nowhere in anything we're going to talk about today does it say that it's going to identify undervaluation. So it looks at a lot of things. It does identify undervaluation by terms of how it undervaluation by terms of how it functions. But does that create risk, an increased level of risk to the lender? It doesn't. So to identify risk, it's going to find overvaluation. So you've got property compliance, which speaks a little bit to your point. How does it affect the realtor? If you have an unusual property, is it going to be qualified to be Fannie Mae level of collateral? And that's something I don't think that we can confidently answer right now. Fannie contends that any loan they would have purchased in the past, they will purchase now. But that Phil, in his role as a lender, will be more aware of the risk that he is taking on if he funds that loan.
So your underwriters who review the appraisal are looking at things a little differently before we go to closing.
Right.
Or before it's approved, I should say.
Because if that underwriter develops a history of loans that are quote-unquote buybacks, that underwriter is going to be unemployed. So that underwriter's got a very personal stake in whether or not that loan becomes a buyback, and this does affect your transaction.
Understood. That's understood.
Very much.
Now it's making sense. Bring me some more.
Well, this next point ties in with where Phil left off. One of the other goals of collateral underwriter is to lift some of that burden from the underwriter that is not an appraiser and identify the weaker appraisals. It has the ability, I'm going to suggest to you all that the lousy appraisal work that was common maybe 20 years ago, the appraiser that would come up with any number that really didn't necessarily focus on trying to get to a supportable number, that guy's already pretty much out of the picture. Anybody who's left is not going to survive the scrutiny under which collateral underwriter can place an appraisal. What that does, tying into Phil's example, is it means that an underwriter will have that risk rating early on in the process. What the intention of that is to take away some of what now is the back and forth that happens when an underwriter has a level of discomfort with collateral or with the value that the appraiser places upon that collateral. And here's how that would work. Let's say that the underwriter gets a appraisal score back, a risk rating of 1 or 1 point something, they do have decimals, or 2, where they know that that appraisal really pretty much met all the requirements of Fannie Mae. And we're going to talk about how it analyzes in a couple of minutes, but it was the computer analysis was satisfied with how it analyzed. That underwriter no longer has to send that appraisal back to an appraiser to say, I want 2 more comps, or I want the perfect comp to be right next door. They know that that appraisal met scrutiny not only of their eyes as an expert but not an appraiser, but it's also met the scrutiny of the collateral underwriter system. So that's among the positives that this system brings to bear. If you're an underwriter and you know that you've got a solid appraisal on your hands, a solid piece of collateral on your hands, that file is moving forward with no further delay. Among the other goals, I think, without question, my professional peers and I are being challenged. So it's moving the profession of appraising forward. We talked just a second ago about the rules that are engaged around the appraisals we write. Don't go more than 6 months back in time or a year back in time. Don't go more than this distance away.
Which is it, 6 months or a year?
Well, it's a year now, but
okay.
It was 6 months to a year was the window. Okay. But they dropped the 6 month thing last fall in an update, and frankly, they've dropped a lot of what Fannie called rules-based guidelines for appraising. So as an example, one of the things that their study leading up to the publication of Collateral Underwriter demonstrated is that appraisers were under-adjusting so that the percentage adjustments would stay within the underwriting guidelines that are important to an underwriter reading it, the 15% maximum, and don't go too much on this line, and don't go over 25-30% on your gross adjustments. Those rules are retired, and they've replaced them with what they call the model-based analysis of collateral underwriter. Now, remember one important thing as we're talking about this. This is only Fannie Mae that is using collateral underwriter. It doesn't mean that lenders are going to relax those rules. I don't know if Freddie Mac has the same adjustment in their process. It doesn't mean that FHA and VA are going to make all these changes. They probably will all conform within a year or two. But at the moment, these are just Fannie Mae rules that we're talking about. They want more focus placed on finding the best comparables, regardless if they require a little bit more adjustment, as opposed to an appraiser feeling pressure to find something that they can keep those numbers small on.
Shouldn't you be finding the best comps anyway?
Amen, Chris. You know, that's, again, some of these things are come up in future slides, but that should always be the focus of the valuation professional. Whether it is you, Chris, on a listing appointment or me researching an appraisal, shouldn't make any difference in that whatsoever.
Okay.
But Fannie would contend that appraisers would at times skip the best comparable in favor of ones that maybe look better on paper, or would guide them to a number that they wanted to get to that maybe wasn't quite as accurate. And those are things that this collateral underwriter has the ability to isolate and challenge upon. Okay, so we touched on this, but it will, if it does its job well, and why I think other folks will adopt this, is it's going to, in the long run, mean that appraisers will have a lot less stipulations, the questions that come back from the lender, but when they occur, they're going to be good questions. As once this system is used and lenders know how to use it, it's going to isolate appraisals or collateral that maybe needs to be looked at a little more closely. So how does this thing work? You've noticed on the appraisals that you've seen that appraisers now communicate in code. I like to tease that I had to earn my decoder ring when this came into to use. Those codes are part of the Uniform Appraisal Data Set. And those cells on the appraisal are the cells that the computer is able to read and Fannie Mae's database is able to accumulate properties that are submitted through their loan packages. All of those coded cells are identified and built into a absolutely huge database. This slide that I'm working from here, these numbers are from a couple of months ago. At that time, there were over 12 million subject properties in Fannie Mae's system.
This is nationwide?
Nationwide. Over 20 million comparables. When I use a comparable on a report, we have to use that same code on that. Their computers will capture that comparable. They say each comparable property is in their system an average of at least 5 times. So after it's used a couple times by different appraisers, they have the ability to see that data on different appraisals and cross-compare that. 25,000 properties per day are being added to the database that go through the Fannie Mae system, submitted to the portal. Freddie Mac does share the portal, by the way, but the review system we're talking about is strictly Fannie Mae. So what does that mean? In order to build a computer-generated an analytical system, you have to have quality data. To make an analogy based on some of the internet-based systems that run estimate values for us, which we have some problems with in our business lives. When we compare this to what the auditor sites may say a property value is, they're all working off public record. Very few have access to anything beyond public record, so they're all just kicking out statistical numbers. Fannie Mae has a database that's built by capturing quality information from appraisals.
Can I ask a question here? And this is off the wall, and I understand that. But this data that's being compiled, is Fannie Mae given any indication that they are protecting it? And what I mean by that, they aren't selling the information to third-party companies that can create a network of how I can sell my information about your house to the public.
The answer to that question is they have a contract with the lenders that they work with. So on the thing, and I've taken pretty much all the training that they have on this right now, they contend that this is a very closed system to be used only by Fannie Mae and their direct customer lenders. Now, taking that to the next point, what about you, Chris, as a real estate agent, or me as an appraiser, being able to use this database to scrub data and learn things? That seems like it would be a logical extension, doesn't it?
Yes.
That is not their intention. In the view of Fannie Mae, this is a private system. Appraisers have taken a little umbrage with this because they've taken the information from our appraisals, and we would love to be able to see some of the analyzing, but that's not their intention. At this point, they have made it crystal clear that this is a private, closed system to be used internally for review purposes at their level and also to be used by their lender customers. So this slide that we have arrived at now is actually kind of a key slide to help you understand how Collateral Underwriter is functioning. You know it's collecting data from appraisals, and you'll see the bottom of the pyramid there is data integrity. That is based on the premise that there is a correct way to describe properties, including the subject and the comparables, and to an equal degree an incorrect way to describe them. So a lot of the use of the code we referred to, rather than describing condition as a good, average, fair, poor, in the English language, we have a numeric 6-number rating system that is used to describe the collateral. If it's a C6, which is condition 6, means it's pretty much not livable. That's probably not a fundable property. C1 is limited to new construction. C2 is a really nice house, and so on. Each of those numerical rating systems has a definition Fannie has created. They've done the same thing for quality. They're collecting data on how we report the site size, how we report the view, what we say the room count is, what's the above-grade room count, what's the finished lower-level room count, is there a bathroom down there? Those are all collectible cells for them. And from their standpoint, if I turn in my appraisal and I say that the house has 2.5 baths, and they have 5 other data points on that same property, and one of those data points, all 5 of those say it only has 2 baths, then we may have, I will likely get to answer a question on that point as to why is my bath count different than 5 other data points they have in their system.
Where does that question come from?
That will be generated by the automated review system. It will go in and cross-compare the appraisal that I've just submitted. When the lender does a submission, when it goes in, it's a completed appraisal. It goes into their portal that reads it, and it's then going to complete this review process that we're discussing today.
So these questions come back to you at any point. Are you comfortable contacting the realtor and asking for help?
Well, hopefully we've done that before we get to the review point.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand where the series of events that take place.
Well, from the standpoint of the practical side of this, Chris, the lenders go back to the Fannie Mae approved the questions go back to the Fannie Mae approved lender. So the actual direct interaction with collateral underwriter is the Fannie Mae approved lender and Fannie Mae, the computer itself. They have the responsibility to determine what to do with that information. This is coming up in another slide, but there's been a lot of emphasis in the more recent training from Fannie Mae effectively saying don't be wasteful in how you use this information. Don't extend a closing, don't delay an appraisal, don't ask questions if it's really not going to affect the conclusions of that appraisal report. Use this as a tool to empower you to not ask those questions if it basically makes sense and it ties in with how the computer analyzes. And again, they consider the base of that foundation data integrity, so that question would go to the lender, and the lender, in theory, has an appraisal expert on board who will make a determination whether that's a question that needs to be sent back to the appraiser. Okay. Next, on top of that, next one up is comp selection. Obviously, the selection of market data is a very, very important part of the valuation process for the agents and the appraisers that spend a great portion of our lives trying to determine what someone's home is worth. Fannie Mae contends that there has been a pattern where the appraiser in the comments section of the report would say something simple like, I've provided the best comps available. So in order to provide balance to those generic comments that are sometimes found on appraisals, this system will search for comps on its own. So it uses Fannie Mae's database. It has access to public record. It does not have MLS access, but it has a different level of data than any other database in the world because it's collected from appraisals that has an accurate rendering of square footage, that has the rooms in the basement identified, things that are not easily found in our routine data sources. So the computer will go in and it ranks what it considers the top 20 comparables that it finds. It gives no consideration to price. So it is searching strictly based on the cells that it collects data on, the living area, the lot size. It considers proximity and physical similarity and identifies what it considers the 20 most similar comparables.
What is the proximity?
Well, in their system, the proximity is not determined by any type of rule. At this point, when collateral underwriter searches for comparables, if it has similar market data in close proximity, it considers those more important than farther away. But if you happen to have the farmhouse in a suburban subdivision, it may look beyond the boundaries of the community into other communities expanding until it finds a couple of older farmhouses that it thinks it identifies as similar. Now, should you or I as valuation experts necessarily go 3 communities over and look at that farmhouse, that's a whole lot tougher question to answer.
Well, my concern is the property that sits on a school district line or on a township line, a local government line, or a county line. And you can have you and I know that, well, of course I can't say for sure. I don't like to cross those lines. But what about this system?
Well, this system searches, they analyze location based on what's called census block groups. That's a component of a census tract, much smaller than the census tract. And it will cross-compare based on average and median sale prices in those different census block groups, whether or not the locations are equal. So if it's an average and median sale price of $100,000 in census block, whatever here, and this one over here is about the same, they would identify that as a similar competitive area. Now, for valuation experts, they recognize in all of their training that we don't analyze that way. And one of the limitations on the use of collateral underwriter is there's things the computer will never know. And that's an example where that school district line might be, which block on a certain street in a community has more appeal than other blocks. Those are harder things for a computer to know, and we'll touch a little bit on how we're going to try to offset that. The comp selection part, to wrap that up for you, if the appraisal scores poorly, and the comparables that I have used on my appraisal report do not match up with the top 20 that Fannie Mae has isolated, the lender now has on a data integrity, they had the choice to send back questions to the appraiser about differences from what's already in the database. On the comp selection, Fannie Mae encourages the lender has tremendous search control with this system. Again, it's not based on MLS, but if it's something that's in their database, they're going to have great information. They encourage the lenders to isolate the top 3 or 4 sales, not 20, the top 3 or 4 that might indicate that the appraiser didn't select the best comparables. And in the case where the appraisal scores poorly and they're concerned, those will be sent back and the appraiser will be asked to take a look at those. Next, moving up the pyramid is what's called adjustments. All of you have read appraisal reports from time to time, and I am certain that you had a moment when you looked at the pluses and minuses in the column where the appraiser says the garage is worth $5 grand or 10 grand or whatever you see in the pluses and minuses. there is not a single correct answer to that's called an adjustment value, that figure that's filled in as a plus or minus. There's not a source for those. There's not a single correct answer to those. One of the things that Fannie is doing with this system, they are doing a computer search based on those property characteristics to identify, through a statistical analysis, to try to identify the contributory value of those type of components. So if I adjust the garage at $3,000 and their system says it should be $10,000, it will point that out. It does two types of analysis on adjustments. It does a regression study, a statistical study based on their database. They have a lot of information, and they say that it's location-oriented, so it'll be focused on properties that are close to whatever subject property we're dealing with. And it will do its own analysis, a model adjustment that it says should be reflective of the market. It also reviews what my peers have done on those same adjustments. So the kickbacks here could come back to the Fannie Mae-based lender and say the adjustments are inconsistent with my peers, or the adjustments are inconsistent with their computer-generated model adjustments.
Is there a fine line for this proximity? I apologize for keep bringing that up, but it's important to me when I'm working with a seller and we're evaluating position for the marketplace where we should be. And, for example, I'm working in a rural environment, and finding comparables in close proximity may be very difficult to do within a year's time.
Sure.
So clearly I'm going to expand my proximity in order to find comparables. Is this system going to operate the same in that type of situation?
Fannie Mae contends, and I haven't had that experience, nor is their training focused on that, but they do have some stuff in their training that says this system knows the difference between a suburban market and a rural market. Fannie Mae is a national entity, so we have to, when I think about their challenge, they have to handle the rural farmhouse in Wyoming where comparables might be 15 or 30 miles away.
Yes.
And they have to handle downtown Cincinnati where, you might be in walking distance everything that's on your analysis. So they say very directly in their training, Kris, that this system is built to account for those type of differences.
If they're using a census tract, that's probably how they're figuring that out.
Well, that's how they base the comparison of location. As for us as analysts, all of us on the webinar and those of us in this room, we know if we switch neighborhoods when we're looking at a comparable, we create a heck of a variable. We switch school districts, we create a heck of a variable. So one of the ways that it's being monitored in this system is looking at average and median sale prices in those different locations. And here's the point to that. If an appraiser selects a comparable that's sold for $150,000, but there are a lot of comparables that this system finds that are physically closer that are at $100,000, this system will look at that $150,000 sale that's on there and say, well, wait a minute, all the sales in the subject neighborhood are $100,000. Where you pick that $150,000 sale from, the average sale price there is $50,000 higher than the neighborhood in which the subject's located. That would pose the challenge as to whether it's an appropriate comparable. Let's take this to the top of the pyramid, an item called reconciliation. This is where Fannie's system will take a look at the comparables, all of the things that we've built the pyramid upon, and see if it believes we have given most weight to the most appropriate pieces of market data. Now, that to me is one of the areas that I think would be hard for a computer to do, because there are a lot of things that the computer will not be able to account for. Here's why it's there. They're trying to avoid the situation where there's a bunch of market data in my subject location, and I've got a 2,000 square foot subject, a two-story house. There's a bunch of market data on 2,000 square foot two-story houses, but somehow my comparables are a couple subdivisions away, and they're 2,500 square feet. And I've appraised the property for a higher amount than all those sales in my subject neighborhood would indicate. That's the point on a positive note from what they're trying to accomplish. So that gives you a little bit idea about how it works. I am very interested in the fact that the National Association of Realtors has Collateral Underwriter directly under its watchful eye right now. It's been the focus of newsletters. It's been in some video presentations. The appraisers in the nation have had, I think, a little bit of an impact on how this has evolved. There's a link of about 20 state coalitions. Ohio was included in that sent a letter off to Federal Housing Finance Authority, to which we did get a response, posing questions and challenges to what's going on with the system to make sure that it's being used properly. And NAR is definitely paying attention. In that email exchange with the linked together state coalitions, Sarah Young, the Associate Regulatory Policy Representative at NAR, responded, and part of that response is what you see on your screen. We plan to have Fannie Mae on a panel at the Realtors Legislative Meeting and Trade Expo in May. Hopefully, we will have more information on the impact of CU, and here's the key, Kris, I think, to what you're talking about, on transactions. by then. And she notes that she got a lot of feedback from appraisers right off the bat. So why, if this tool has the ability to do some very positive things, are there concerns in the industry? What are those concerns, and how might this impact our day-to-day business? One of the concerns deals with the cost of collateral assessment. I think everybody in the real estate community recognizes that appraisal fees are by far and away the highest that they have ever been. Whether it's a retail lender working directly, a direct hire lender working with an appraiser, or one with a management company insulator in place, the total dollar amount that the consumer is paying for the appraisal is extraordinarily high compared to historic numbers. Believe me, the appraiser's not capturing that money. Our business life is no different than yours. There's a lot more paperwork involved. The reports take a lot more time. But the concern there is it fair to the consumer if appraisers are adding to our report, expanding our report content, and that we're eventually going to want to pass that cost on to the consumer. This is a new system, just went into place January 26th. So I think I and most of my peers are trying to do a wait and see here to see what this is really like to deal with day in, day out, rather than increase fees right now. But it's a legitimate concern that the industry has. If it's unnecessary additional work, people don't want to see fees creeping up and costing the consumer more to obtain a home loan. Along that same line, there's a lot of concern about the back and forth. Will this accomplish Fannie Mae's goal to reduce the amount of back and forth with an appraisal, or will it result in delays, more questions coming back more often than they have in the past, resulting in maybe things basically delays, things not getting done in a timely manner because we've got more to account for in the appraisal part of the process. I think the big question in the real estate community is, will collateral underwriter stop anything from getting to the closing table that should get to the closing table? And here I will give you, we'll talk about that on the next slide, but here's the silver lining. Fannie Mae, at the end of the day, is a business. Fannie Mae counts their profit in billions. I'm pretty sure my company won't ever do that, or most of yours won't, but they can't offend and chase away business. So if there are failures in this system at the beginning that delay closings, that are not easily accounted for, they're going to fix it because they are a business. They have to compete for business. Some of the other industry concerns. Since the flags are about overvaluation, will there be a tendency on the part of appraisers to follow the line of least resistance? Is it, from a practical standpoint, going to be easier for appraisers to come in a little bit low than to fight for a deal that maybe should make it? I can tell you what we talk about among ourselves at appraiser meetings is, don't let this system become a bully that mandates to you that you don't value a property as accurately as you possibly can. It's intimidating when you've got an entity as large as Fannie Mae and a database as large as collateral underwriter looking over your shoulder. But the voice of the appraisers right now is, if it should have been worth $100,000 yesterday, it's still worth $100,000 today, no matter what the system comes back and challenges us upon. So we will answer that question by saying, it has the ability to scare appraisers into a lower value, but I think all of us are drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm not letting this thing change what I think the property is worth. Industry concern on that second bullet point, and this speaks to what Kris brought up before. What about the odd property? What about the rural house? What about the the jet airplane you see at the bottom of the screen there sticking out the wall? By the way, I don't want to appraise that one, so find somebody else for that assignment. And the odd properties do have the potential to get a higher risk rating. But once again, the silver lining is every odd property is a much more likely to get a higher risk rating. Therefore, Fannie Mae, if they want to compete, is going to have to find ways to be participatory in that part of the market. Or a lender who can't take a routine file to a Fannie Mae-based program is going to shy away from the programs on other files. So again, they're going to find ways to be competitive. So if you've got the odd house, it's already hard for an odd piece of real estate to serve as collateral. I would not suggest that it will get easier, but I don't think in the long run that this is going to make it any more difficult to use an unusual piece of property for collateral for a Fannie Mae-based loan. Here is another great point that I don't know how a computer can account for, and that is, how does this system react to things like different inventory levels, supply and demand characteristics, curb appeal, design elements, other key property characteristics that can really affect what a property is worth. For example, take a look at the two pictures that are on your screen now. To a computer, those could both very easily just simply be 1,200 square foot Cape Cods. But are they equal in the eyes of the buying public? You might think that, I would suspect that the majority of buyers would look at the top picture and think that's a little more simple, doesn't have much curb appeal. Might be the same square footage and room count as the one in the bottom picture, but that's got a little bit more curb appeal, a little more design element, got the dormers, it's got a nice little front porch. It's a better looking house in the eyes of many buyers, so that might sell for a little bit more. But to a computer, again, they may both be 1,200 square foot houses that are a couple of doors apart on the same street. So those are concerns. And I think looking at this on a proactive way, the appraiser and the real estate practitioners that are involved in these files are going to need to highlight the positives of the houses that do have a little something special going for them. This is, again, I think coming up in another slide, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how this might affect a real estate practitioner's participation in the appraisal part of the process. So if you've got a house that has good curb appeal, if you know about supply and demand characteristics that might affect what someone's willing to pay, to make sure during the process that the appraiser has that information. Something Kris and I have talked about, or Kris has talked about a lot in the committee meetings, is just a reminder to everybody, during the development of value process, you do have an open line of communication to the appraiser that has that assignment. So making sure there's a packet on the counter, emailing information, meeting the appraiser at the house, all of those things are magnified in importance when you have a challenging file. And your appraisers will recognize, there are agents like my good friend Kris here who will meet the appraiser on nearly every stop, but we don't get that level of personal interaction a lot. So you may find that the appraiser is going to ask you what motivated you to take time out of your busy schedule to join them at that stop. Be candid and tell them. You know, if you're there because you want to make sure they understand supply and demand characteristics, if you're there because you know a lot about the house next door, if you're there because you want to say, here are the keys that made this house sell for a little more than some of the other houses in the neighborhood, be there and make sure we have that information. Example that we give there, what if you do have historic lower price points around this house? What if inventory is light so buyer selection is limited? That all affects market value, doesn't it? But will a historic-based search system like Collateral Underwriter be able to account for that? So that's where the appraiser has to come in and quantify and justify if the property is worth more than the house next door or the historic sales down the street.
So we're going down the right path of some questions that I have, especially as it pertains to one house on one side of the street and has a golf course in its backyard and a full view of the fairway. Same street, opposite street number across the street doesn't have that view.
Well, Kris, that would be accounted for in the Collateral Underwriter system and in your and my routine value analysis on what we will call the view component of the analysis.
Okay, very good.
And in this case, Fannie Mae's system has the ability to look at the view line and ask the computer on views that are rated, well, there's different terms for views in the code, but views that are rated favorable, beneficial is the term that they use on that line, and have something like the golf course or the city view, and views that are rated neutral. That's not a non-factor, and they use the term adverse for negative views. So in theory, you can account for through their computer analysis or for us as analysts in the different impacts that those views might have. So could there be a case when the result of a Collateral Underwriter level review causes the appraised value to reduce? Anytime someone submits market data to an appraiser after that appraisal is completed, whether it's this system or whether it's a real estate agent or a homeowner that wants to appeal the appraisal, they always do so with the hope and the intention to change the appraiser's opinion. So when they send comparables to me, if they're generated by this system, if they mandate or indicate that my value is incorrect, there could be a change. My expectation will be that will be very, very rare. I think appraisers are going to, again, fight for what we believe is right on each file.
Well, let me ask you something, though. Right down that point, if an appraisal professional is inputting their data and there is an issue with value, with reaching the value of the purchase contract, before submission, is there a way for the appraiser to contact, or is there a way for the realtor to contact the appraiser and verify that everything's moving okay? Is there something I can help you with? Do we need to put our minds together? I've got an issue here. I've had it happen in the past where I've met an appraiser at the home, and the reason I did that is because if there is an issue, they feel comfortable calling me.
Sure.
And say, listen, Kris, I got an issue here. I can't reach your number. Help me. I've had that happen. how does it work with this?
Well, it's not necessarily, that is not necessarily a collateral underwriter issue. That's a protocol during the development of value issue, Chris. And it is my belief that that level of communication during the process is an important part of the process. Appraisers do our market research first waves fairly early before we go out to the neighborhood to see the house. So we sometimes know at that point whether or not we have market data or we don't have market data.
Okay.
I have two active files in my office that I think demonstrate your point. One is a little property that is selling for $30,000, $40,000 more than some of the sales within the last year. That is a purchase transaction. I was able to communicate with the listing agent via email, and she responded promptly. I have all the comparables that she considered. I have all of her analysis that she considered and how she priced the property. Now, does that mean my appraisal is necessarily going to be favorable? I don't know that yet. I'm still working on that one, but I know exactly what she analyzed and how she analyzed it. I think that's as much as an agent can do to help me. I've got another file that's owned by a real estate professional, and it's a multifamily, and we had the conversation at the door. I consider that a professional courtesy call. If I'm appraising a house owned by another real estate professional, you don't have any obligation to share data with me, but I'm going to extend the invitation if you feel like it's an appropriate idea to share that data. We are getting close to the end of our presentation, so let's hit a couple of points here. What differences may be noticed in a transaction? Again, that question is looking at it from the real estate community standpoint of getting a sale done. It is my hope that within a couple of months that the answer to that will be almost nothing. There's already an occasion where an underwriter issue comes up relative to an appraisal. That will always be a part of our business life. Whether it's generated by an automated review or a human review won't change the fact that on occasion there will be a file slowed down. I don't think this system, once people know how to use it, is going to result in any additional levels of slowdown. How should agents prepare for an appraisal in the era of automated review? Is this a change from that standpoint? As Chris and I just talked about, probably not. And I would recommend today and here's the key to this answer. During the development of a value process, from the time I receive the order and before I turn it in to the lender, our line of communication is pretty open. We have to be disciplined and follow the law. There's bribery and there's things like that are against the law. But in terms of information exchange, that information exchange door is wide open between the agents that are involved and the appraiser. Once the appraisal is turned in, it's a confidential document owned by that lender. So the ability to communicate after it's turned in is totally different. That speaks to Chris's point before. Communicate early, communicate often, make sure I'm aware. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to turn out how you want. But it does guarantee, well, it does improve the chances. We know what you were thinking. It does guarantee that we're going to know what you want us to know, which I think is the minimum we would want to accomplish there. And the final question on the PowerPoint is, should comparable searches be altered to match the searches by collateral underwriter? And this speaks to Chris's earlier point. Absolutely not. You look for the best comparables that you can find and follow the same protocol that you always have. I'm going to wrap this up, and we'll see if we have a minute or two for questions. This webinar has been brought to you by the Realtor Affiliate Committee of the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors. Staff Liaison Amanda Wilson is our contact, and she would be more than happy to forward questions to any of the seminar hosts here if there's things that we can answer at a later date. Do we have time to answer a question or two?
It doesn't look like we have any. If you've got some questions, you can please type them in the message below and hit enter and submit them, and we would love to address or field any questions that you might have. Also know that this is being recorded, and it can be listened to in the future at cabr.org. Click on the Our Media tab to listen to this in its entirety at a later date.
Phil, any comments or questions as we wind down?
It's a great presentation. We haven't seen so much of this product affecting our business, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by that. It was introduced to our process late in the month of January this year, and so far this year, to this point, in all the transactions I've had to go through, I haven't seen it affect anything. So overall, it seems like Fannie Mae's doing a nice job of managing the product, and seems to not be affecting things in a negative way so far.
It looks like we are question free, but understand that you can submit any questions in the future to Amanda, and she will forward them to our committee, and we would love to address those in our meetings and get answers to you quickly. So we appreciate your time. We will be doing more of these in the future. I think the plan is to do them bi-monthly starting now. So there will be another one in May, and it is going to cover home inspections.
Yes.
So very good. We appreciate your time. Look forward to hearing you in a couple months. Thanks. House. Okay.
There you go. Well, what do we have, 22 at the max and 18 or 19 at the end?
And look,
So we're hanging there.
and look, I know we went over. I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have been here. No one left.
I was watching that, and I was looking at the time. I'm like, we're going way over on time, but it seems to be going well. Keep my mouth shut.
There's stuff that Amanda said out in public said it had 40, 45 minutes on her time for
good.
things that went out in public. So from that standpoint, it's
Well
ballpark.
done, gentlemen.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys being here. It really added a lot to the experience. They have teammates in here, and I feel I can't thank you. This guy took my first version of PowerPoint, which you sounds like you grade these things too. You always goof things up, and he didn't just read it; he read it close enough to say you left the word out. Which I'm very grateful for.
I hate that. I'm in the middle of a presentation and I'm looking at it.
And then you catch it.
You know what I mean? But when you're typing it,
You read that stuff out.
Put that, that or this, or you know what I mean? You missed a word, missed a letter. Yeah. That's
What was the
crazy.
score of that webinar?
Well,
Did you have a part there?
if I was something to contribute, well, I stepped in when we were talking about, what's the underwriter's concern,
Oh, good.
and trying to address that. But again, that's kind of the point of just,
No, I was just kidding because every time I walked in, you were just...
Well, if I have something productive to say, I'll say it. But, Steve is in charge of doing a nice job.
You know what? I'll tell you something. This, I don't know if there's anything.
We think.
I don't know if there's anything. If any, to find a way